So you want your car to last forever and you want it to work at every drift event? We're gonna show you guys how.
So the first thing we're gonna check for is any really excessive and sloppiness in the steering wheel, our pedals, and any of our other components that we use our hands on. You're gonna wanna check and see. This is very tight. I can feel the wheels turning, so we're good. Then we're gonna check that we get a nice brake here, which we do. Obviously, nice and tight here in our gears. So you're gonna wanna check your seats for tightness. So just give it a good wiggle in here. Make sure you don't feel any obvious movement in the seat. And the last thing I like to check while we're inside is the pedals. I know for a fact that we need to do a little service on this throttle pedal. That's a little bit too much lateral play there. And it's from these weak brackets that Nissan puts on. And when Matt tries to push the pedal through the floor, it tends to weaken up those mounts. Brake, we're good and tight. We got no lateral play there. Clutch, feels nice. It engages or disengages right up here all the way through. So we don't have a lot of excess in the clutch pedal.
So most of us don't have a lift. We do, it's not a flex, but for a long time we're doing this on jack stands. So we're gonna show you guys how you do it on jack stands, and that's gonna be most of your guys' situation. So let's get this thing up. Once you're on jack stands, always freaking come on each corner and kind of give it a push and a shake and just make sure it's stable. It seems silly, but you don't want to freaking have this thing come down here, so.
The next thing that I always do is I check for excessive play in both our front wheels, both side to side, and that's fine. That's turning the steering, and top to bottom. That'll let us know if we've got any loose components, bad hub, anything like that. This one feels good. Now we'll move to the back. Same here, side to side, good. And look at that. This side's in need of a hub. So we'll get that switched out. Now that we got our wheels off, we're gonna come in here and do a visual inspection of all of our suspension components, our steering components, and just make sure that nothing is obviously broken, bent, damaged, or anything else like that. We're also gonna do the same thing on the back, so we're gonna visually inspect everything back here. Have a look at your axles, specifically your axle boots and axle play. This one's good. If you've got a tear in your axle boot, that is going to fail almost guaranteed on the next event. That means that that joint is gonna be dry. So we definitely want to change that axle out if you see a ripped boot.
We run them, I'm not gonna lie to you guys, we'll run them with torn boots, but we have spares with us and we know that they're gonna fail and we're kind of watching out for it. I hate to say you can run them. If it's their daily driver, absolutely not, but if it's a solely or drift car, you can run them with broken boots. Just know that they are gonna fail pretty soon and have spares with you. You want to nut and bolt every corner of the car. We always like to start on the front. We'll go like left corner, right corner, and then move to the back. You're looking for anything that comes loose. One really common thing is these tie rods. On all cars, they always come loose, either here or these jam nuts. So you're making sure those are tight. Every time on tie rods. Some stuff you can get away with paint marks, but I wouldn't paint mark stuff that you know is coming loose. But this is where you learn. The more you kind of nut and bolt your car every time, you learn what comes loose, and then you can get away with paint marking stuff and just visually inspecting the paint marks. But some stuff require being tightened every single time.
This is also a really good time while you're going through and checking every bolt on the front end here to inspect your brakes, inspect your rotors, make sure everything's good to go, clean up any mess. This would be the time when we'd clean up any gunk from the track and make everything look nice so that it's easy to spot leaks and stuff like that. So again, we're gonna do the exact same thing on the back. Make sure you check every nut and bolt on the suspension and check for any damaged boots, check for any damaged bushings, things of that nature.
Check those coilovers too, front and rear. Those come loose sometimes.
Yeah,
like
sometimes your jam nuts will come loose, but...
This is another big visual one, but you want to look all throughout your engine bay. You're looking for leaks, broken hoses, checking all the fluid levels.
We definitely want to check our oil level as well as our water level, and make sure that those are all good and up to par. That's right there. And you want to make sure that your brake fluid level is acceptable. Beautiful. As well as occasionally drawing all that fluid out of the reservoir and exchanging it for fresh fluid, and then bleeding your brakes to kind of remove some of the old fluid in the lines.
If you can't remember the last time you bled your brakes, go and bleed your brakes. You probably have no idea what you're missing out on. It's going to change the game for you, and it's a huge safety thing. But it doesn't need to be done very often, but you should know the last time you did it.
There's not a ton more to do under here once you've checked all your fluids, topped anything off that needs topping off. You're going to want to empty any catch cans that you might have in the car, as well as do the same thing in here as we did with the suspension and put a wrench on every nut and bolt that you can see. You want to make sure that everything in this engine bay is tight, including, and most importantly, motor mounts.
One other easy one, double check your belts. Check the tension on them, make sure there's no tears or they look like they're really getting old. The nice thing is, like, guys, this whole process should not take you that long once you kind of get used to it, and it really is a lot of just looking at stuff, and it seems like, well, I just looked at it, is that really good enough? But you're going to start catching stuff, and then you're going to replace them as you're going, and it's going to make a massive difference in your drive time.
All right, guys, now we're underneath. So what you're going to want to do under here is make sure that you don't have any major leaks, no weeping from the oil pan, no obvious transmission leakage. And you're going to want to do the same thing down here. Make sure you put a wrench on all this stuff. Paying close attention to your bell housing bolts, maybe your clutch slave cylinder if you have this type of clutch, and definitely eyeballing any other fuel lines and things like that that may have.
I mean, even like the rack, that can come loose on some cars.
The rack can come loose, especially with most of these cars that have modified rack spacers and extended outer control or outer tie rod ends and things like that. These adjusters tend to come loose. I like to throw a little bit of Loctite on these guys, and that keeps them in there pretty solid. It makes them kind of a to take out, but
no Loctite on suspension components, but there are a couple things like that where it just really makes sense, because this isn't going to be really a breakable part. What's going to break is out here, and so if you're getting a crash or something, your tie rod's going to break. This is like a forged nice piece, so you're safer to Loctite that.
And it removes here anyway, so it'll just unthread right out of that guy, and this stays in your rack. All right, guys, same thing in the rear. So in the rear, we've got some other different things that we're going to be paying attention to. Mainly, we're going to want to check every single axle bolt in these axles. These things tend to loosen up, okay? And you definitely want to check them every single time you take the car out. Another very important thing, especially if you had modified rear suspension, is to check these lower control arm bolts. With this style that we have, they tend to loosen up almost every time we take the car out. Another one of the major ones, for me at least, is the drive shaft bolts. If these things loosen up, this is going to ruin your entire day and probably destroy half of the bottom of your car. So make sure that every single one of these is tight. Check your U-joints for any loose or excessive play, front and rear. We all know we like to add all sorts of extra fun components like canards. Typically our bumpers are just zip tied on. So we want to just make sure that everything is secure. Any major cracks, things like this, broken fenders is addressed in one way or another. That way we don't have parts flying off the car on the track.
Yeah, and if you do this stuff at home, like after you get back from an event, you zip stitch your cracks or put a new fender on or refiberglass it, whatever. then you don't have to spend time doing that at the track. Sometimes we're gonna have stuff happen at the track, we're gonna do it there, but it's really about saving your drive time, getting as much as possible.
So you also want to check things such as pins. Make sure your pins are nice and solid, so your hood's not gonna fly up in your face. It's definitely important. Make sure that your doors shut and latch good, because sometimes we take damage on the sides, and sometimes our doors don't shut quite right. Any of these components that we bolt on, we just want to make sure everything is nice and tight. You know, we don't run a rear bumper on this car right now, so basically just a nice visual inspection of the outside, make sure everything is good to go, and that you're not going to get flagged or called off track because you've got crap hanging off the side of your car. So after you inspect the exterior, we're going to move on to the interior. We're just going to look around, make sure we don't have any loose, floppy wires, anything like that. Nothing dangerous on the inside, especially if you're doing stuff such as ride-alongs where you've got a passenger in the car. You want to make sure their area is completely neat and nothing can fly out and hit them. As well as both seats being nice and tight. Throw some wrenches on a lot of the nuts and bolts inside the car, because this stuff tends to loosen up just as much as this stuff on the outside. Make sure you're checking everything, and yeah, that should be good for the interior. So your guys' car is probably going to look a little bit different than this. Our fuel system is located here in the trunk, as well as our battery. So we definitely want to make sure that we have no leakage, no connections that are close to anything metal, so we get no arcing, no dangerous sparks back here, and that our battery is nice and snug in its box, as well as inspecting your fuel components. Now, depending on where your fuel tank's located in your car, this is going to look quite a bit different. This is a swirl pot that we've got for ours, and basically all the fuel pumps into here, stays up in here, so we always have some fuel. So this is a good place for stuff to leak. So we definitely check all this. And you can even remove this panel and check the top side of your tank.
So now you're ready to put your wheels and tires back on. I always like to check them before we put them back on. I mean, these are fairly trashed, but we know we're going back to Muscle Man Honda circuit again, and we'll run these. But we know where these are at. That's important, right? I know that these have chunks missing. They got too hot and they just started disintegrating. I'm also looking at dents. The stent has been here for a long time. It still holds air, but I'm aware of it. That's kind of the big thing. Same as fronts. These look beautiful. I freaking love how our suspension wears and tears on these. They're awesome. So these are good to go. Let's toss them back on. So last thing you did there, torque those wheels. Always important before you go, but you're ready to rip. That's about it. Do that every event, and you're gonna be so much more successful. All right, hit that subscribe button, guys. We'll see you guys in a couple days. Peace out.